I never imagined that owning a single acre of scrubland outside Phoenix, Arizona, would give me leverage over the most insufferable homeowner association in Maricopa County. But here I was, sitting on a gold mine that Brenda Patterson and her HOA board desperately needed. The cell tower on my property was the only reason Pine Ridge Estates had decent phone reception, and the annual lease renewal was exactly 32 days away. My name is Zachary Garrison, and I bought that worthless piece of desert 7 years ago for almost nothing. It sat right on the edge of Pine Ridge Estates, technically outside their jurisdiction but close enough that, when AT&T came looking for a spot to build a cell tower, they jumped at my offer. The tower went up 5 years ago, and the telecom company paid me $48,000 annually for the privilege. What I didn't realize at the time was that the HOA, led by the relentless Brenda Patterson, would become increasingly dependent on that tower for their precious property values and modern lifestyle. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, addressed to me personally despite the fact that I didn't live in their community. I lived in a modest house in Tempe, about 20 miles away. The letter, written in the most condescending tone imaginable, informed me that my property was creating an eyesore for the community, and that I needed to landscape appropriately or face legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. They wanted me to spend thousands of dollars landscaping property that wasn't even in their neighborhood, on land that they had no authority over whatsoever. The signature at the bottom belonged to Brenda Patterson, HOA president, and her contact information was listed with the kind of formality that screamed self-importance. I called the number immediately. A woman answered on the second ring with a voice that could cut glass. Pine Ridge Estates HOA, Brenda Patterson speaking. Miss Patterson, this is Zachary Garrison. I just received your letter about my property. Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad you're being proactive about this issue, Mr. Garrison. When can we expect the landscaping to be completed? Never, I said flatly. Your HOA has no jurisdiction over my property. It's not part of Pine Ridge Estates. There was a pause that felt like ice forming over a phone line. Mr. Garrison, while your property may not technically fall within our boundaries, it is visible from our community and therefore affects our property values. We have a responsibility to our homeowners to maintain standards. Your responsibility ends at your property line, Miss Patterson. My land is my business. I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation, she said, her voice taking on a threatening edge. We have lawyers, Mr. Garrison, very good lawyers. If you refuse to cooperate, we will pursue legal remedies. I laughed, which clearly wasn't the response she expected. Go ahead. While you're at it, maybe consider the fact that the cell tower on my property is the only reason anyone in Pine Ridge Estates has phone service. The lease is up for renewal next month. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her brain working through the implications. Are you threatening us, Mr. Garrison? No, madam. I'm just stating facts. You send me legal threats, I remind you of business realities. Have a nice day. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I knew I'd just poked a hornet's nest, but the audacity of that woman demanding I landscape property she had no claim to had pushed me past my limit. 3 days later, I received another letter. This one was from a law firm in Scottsdale, Henderson, Myers and Associates. It was a formal cease and desist, demanding that I not interfere with telecommunications services and threatening legal action if I did anything to jeopardize the cell tower operation. The letter very carefully avoided mentioning the landscaping issue, which told me their lawyers had informed them they had no legal standing on that front. What the letter did do, however, was reveal just how panicked they were about the tower lease. I pulled out my copy of the agreement with AT&T and read through it carefully. The lease was indeed up for renewal on July 15th, exactly 29 days away. The terms specified that either party could decline renewal with 60 days' notice, which meant that technically, the deadline for me to cancel had already passed. But there was a clause that allowed for renegotiation of terms during the renewal period. I started doing research. I called AT&T's Property Management Division and spoke with a representative named Marcus Chen, who handled their tower leases in the Southwest region. "Mr. Garrison, yes, we have your renewal coming up. We've been very satisfied with the arrangement. Did you have questions about the new terms?" "What would happen if I declined to renew?" I asked. There was a pause. "Well, we'd have to remove the equipment and find an alternative location. That particular tower serves about 3,000 customers in the immediate area. It would take us probably 6 to 8 months to identify a new site, get permits, and build a replacement tower." "Why? Are you unhappy with the lease terms?" "Just exploring my options," I said. "The current rate is $48,000 annually, correct?" "That's right." "We're prepared to offer a 5% increase for the renewal period, bringing it to $50,400. "I'll need some time to think about it," I said. "The market rate for tower leases has gone up significantly." "Of course. Let me know if you'd like to discuss the terms further." I hung up with a smile. I had no intention of actually declining the lease, but knowing that I had genuine leverage was empowering. The money was good, and I wasn't about to shoot myself in the foot out of spite. But Brenda Patterson didn't need to know that. The following week, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man's voice greeted me with forced friendliness. "Mr. Garrison, my name is Todd Patterson. I'm Brenda's husband. I was hoping we could talk about this situation like reasonable adults." "I'm listening," I said. "Look, my wife can be a bit intense about the HOA stuff. It's her passion project, you know. But I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. What if we paid for the landscaping ourselves? Would that resolve the issue?" I considered this. Todd seemed more reasonable than his wife, but the principle bothered me. "Mr. Patterson, it's not about the money. It's about your HOA trying to exert control over property that isn't yours. If I let you landscape my land, what's next? Do you start telling me what I can and can't do with the rest of it?" "I understand your concern," he said carefully. "But you have to understand, we have homeowners who paid a lot of money to live in a certain kind of community. That tower, while necessary, isn't exactly beautiful. We're just trying to make it less obtrusive." "The tower's been there for 5 years," I pointed out. "Why is this suddenly an issue now?" Todd sighed. "Between you and me, we're trying to attract some new buyers to the development. There are still about 30 empty lots and the developer wants to sell them off. Better aesthetics mean better sales, which means better property values for everyone." Now we were getting to the truth. "So this isn't about community standards. It's about money." "Everything's about money, Mr. Garrison. Surely you understand that, given that you're collecting 50 grand a year from that tower." 48,000, I corrected automatically, then mentally kicked myself for revealing that detail. "Right. Look, what if we made you an offer? A one-time payment to landscape the property and maintain it going forward. Say $10,000. I almost laughed. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate you reaching out, but no. The answer is no. Your HOA sent me legal threats before trying a civil conversation. That doesn't sit well with me." "Can I be honest with you?" Todd's voice dropped lower. Brenda's going to lose her mind. She's already talking about doing something drastic. Like what? I don't know. But when she gets an idea in her head, she doesn't let go. I just wanted to try to smooth this over before things escalate. Please think about it. He hung up, leaving me with an uneasy feeling. What could an HOA president possibly do that would be considered drastic? I found out 2 days later when I drove out to check on my property. Someone had dumped trash all along the fence line bordering Pine Ridge Estates. Not just a little trash, hundreds of bags of garbage, old furniture, broken appliances, and what looked like construction debris. The smell was overwhelming in the June desert heat. I immediately called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and filed a report for illegal dumping. A deputy came out, took photos, and wrote up a report, but he was honest with me about the likelihood of finding who did it. Unless you've got cameras out here, Mr. Garrison, it's going to be tough. Could be anyone. It was the HOA, I said. This is retaliation. The deputy looked skeptical. A homeowner association. That seems unlikely. Why would they dump trash on your property? I explained the whole situation to him, and his expression shifted from skeptical to concerned. That's a pretty serious allegation. You have any proof? Not yet, but I will. I spent the next 3 days, and about $1,500 getting the trash removed, and installing 4 high-definition security cameras covering every angle of my property. I also put up new no trespassing signs, and had a lawyer friend in temp draft a letter to the HOA putting them on notice that any future vandalism would result in criminal charges and civil litigation. Brenda Patterson's response arrived via email within hours of receiving my lawyer's letter. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive writing, claiming that the HOA had nothing to do with the unfortunate incident on my property, and suggesting that perhaps I should invest in better security to prevent random acts of vandalism in the future. She also reminded me that, as a member of the greater Pine Ridge community, I had a responsibility to maintain my property to certain standards. I wasn't a member of any community she controlled, but her delusion was becoming clearer. Brenda Patterson viewed the entire area as her personal fiefdom, regardless of actual legal boundaries. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for June 23rd, and I learned about it from Todd Patterson, who called me again 3 days before. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, he said quietly, but Brenda's planning to make a motion to use HOA funds to hire a lawyer to fight against your tower lease renewal. On what grounds? I asked, genuinely curious about the mental gymnastics involved. She's claiming the tower is a nuisance and that the HOA has standing to intervene in the lease negotiation. She's also talking about filing complaints with the FCC and the county about the tower's safety. The tower's been inspected and approved by every relevant agency, I said. It's completely legal and up to code. I know that. You know that. But Brenda doesn't care. She just wants to cause you enough trouble that you'll give in to her demands. I think she believes she can pressure AT&T to move the tower somewhere else. That would take months and cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, I said. They're not going to do that because an HOA president has a vendetta. You're probably right, Todd said, but she's going to try anyway. I just thought you should know. Why are you helping me? I asked. You're married to her. Todd was quiet for a moment. Because she's wrong and this has gotten out of hand. I love my wife, but the HOA thing has turned into an obsession. She spends hours every day policing the neighborhood, sending violation notices, measuring people's grass height. It's not healthy. Sounds like a personal problem, I said, not unkindly. Yeah, well, it becomes everyone else's problem eventually. Just watch your back, Mr. Garrison. I decided to attend the HOA meeting. I had no right to vote or speak officially, but it was a public meeting, and I wanted to hear firsthand what Brenda had planned. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a fancy building with a pool and tennis courts that probably cost more than my house. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row. About 40 residents filtered in, most of them middle-aged or older, all with the well-maintained appearance of people who took their property values very seriously. Brenda Patterson was impossible to miss. She was a thin woman in her early 50s with highlighted blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a white pantsuit that screamed authority. She stood at the front of the room arranging papers and checking her phone with the efficient movements of someone who loved being in charge. When she noticed me in the back row, her entire body went rigid. She whispered something to another board member, a man in his 60s with a golf tan, and he turned to look at me with open hostility. The meeting started with typical HOA business: approval of last month's minutes, a treasurer's report, discussion of pool maintenance, and a heated debate about whether the community should switch to desert landscaping to save water. I sat through 45 minutes of minutiae before they finally reached the item I'd been waiting for. Next on the agenda, Brenda announced, her voice crisp and professional, is a discussion of the telecommunications tower located on the property adjacent to Pine Ridge Estates. As many of you know, this tower, while providing necessary cell service, has become an increasing concern for our community. She clicked a remote, and a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the screen behind her. The first slide showed a photo of my property with the tower, taken from an unflattering angle that made it look more imposing than it actually was. This tower sits on private property owned by a Mr. Zachary Garrison, Brenda continued, not looking at me. Mr. Garrison has refused to work with the HOA to improve the aesthetic impact of this structure on our community. Furthermore, the lease agreement between Mr. Garrison and AT&T is up for renewal next month. She clicked to the next slide, which showed a list of bullet points about supposed concerns regarding the tower: electromagnetic radiation, property value impact, visual blight, and decreased appeal to potential buyers. I've consulted with our legal counsel, Brenda said, and we have several options for addressing this issue. First, we can file a formal complaint with the Maricopa County Planning and Zoning Department, requesting a review of the tower's compliance with current regulations. Second, we can submit comments to the FCC regarding health and safety concerns. Third, we can explore legal action to establish that the HOA has standing to intervene in the lease renewal process. A woman in the third row raised her hand. Brenda, how much is all this going to cost? We just approved a special assessment for the pool repairs. Brenda smiled tightly. I've budgeted $15,000 from our reserve fund for legal and filing fees. This is an investment in our property values and our community's future. Excuse me, I said loudly from the back of the room. Every head turned. Brenda's face went from pale to flushed in about 2 seconds. This is a closed session for HOA members only, she snapped. Actually, said the golf tan board member next to her, looking uncomfortable, it's an open meeting. He has a right to observe. Fine. Observe silently then, Brenda said. I have a question, I continued, standing up. Miss Patterson, have you informed the homeowners here that if you successfully interfere with my tower lease, they'll lose cell phone service for 6 to 8 months while AT&T builds a replacement tower somewhere else? The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's face went from red to purple. That's speculation and fear-mongering, she said. It's a direct quote from AT&T's regional property manager, I said. I can provide his contact information if anyone wants to verify. A man in the front row stood up. "Is that true, Brenda? We'll lose service." "Temporarily, perhaps, but my wife has a heart condition," the man said. "We need reliable phone service. This is insane." Other voices joined in, the room dissolving into chaos. Brenda tried to regain control, banging a gavel on the podium. "Everyone, please. We're just exploring options. Nothing has been decided." "I have another piece of information that might interest everyone," I said, my voice carrying over the noise. "The HOA sent me legal threats, and then someone dumped hundreds of bags of trash on my property. I've installed security cameras now, and I've filed a police report. If anyone from this community comes onto my property without permission, they'll be arrested for trespassing." The room went silent. Brenda looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. "That's slander," she said weakly. "We had nothing to do with any trash dumping." "Then you won't mind if the sheriff investigates," I said. "I'm sure the security footage from this community's cameras might show some interesting traffic leaving around the time the dumping occurred." I'd been bluffing, but Brenda's face told me I'd hit close to the mark. The Golf Tan board member stood up. "I think we need to table this discussion," he said. "This is getting out of hand. I move to adjourn the meeting." "Seconded," said another board member immediately. Brenda tried to object, but she was outvoted 4-1. The meeting dissolved into angry clusters of conversation. I left quickly, not wanting to get cornered by angry residents, but I noticed Todd Patterson watching me from the corner of the room. He gave me a small nod that might have been approval or might have been a warning. I couldn't tell. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus Chen at AT&T. "Mr. Garrison, I've been receiving some unusual communications from a homeowner association near your property. They're claiming the tower is a health hazard and demanding we relocate it." "That's Brenda Patterson," I said. "She's the HOA president. She's angry because I won't let her dictate how I use my property." "I see. Well, I want to assure you that we take our lease agreement seriously. The tower is completely compliant with all regulations, and we have no intention of relocating it. However, these kinds of complaints can be time-consuming to deal with. We have to respond to every filing, every concern, every regulatory inquiry." "I understand," I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Are you reconsidering the lease renewal?" "Not at all," Marcus said. "In fact, I'd like to offer you an amended lease with a significant increase in the annual payment. We value the stability of this location, and we want to ensure you're motivated to continue our partnership despite any local opposition." My heart rate picked up. "What kind of increase?" "We're prepared to offer $75,000 annually, with a 10-year commitment and a clause that provides additional compensation if you incur any legal expenses defending the tower against local challenges." I had to sit down. $75,000. That's right. "We'll also include an escalation clause that increases the payment by 3% annually. And we'll pay for any landscaping or improvements you want to make to the property, up to $25,000. I couldn't help but laugh. Brenda Patterson's vendetta against me was about to earn me an extra $27,000 a year. "When can we sign?" I asked. "I'll have the paperwork sent over today. We'd like to get this locked in before the current lease expires." After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. The money was fantastic, but I knew Brenda wasn't going to give up just because AT&T had renewed the lease. If anything, it would make her more determined. I was right. 2 days after I signed the new lease agreement, I received a certified letter informing me that the Pine Ridge Estates HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for creating a private nuisance and seeking an injunction to force the removal of the cell tower. The lawsuit was filed in Maricopa County Superior Court, and it was signed by a lawyer from a different firm than the one that had sent the initial cease and desist letter. I immediately called my own attorney, a woman named Catherine Ellis, who specialized in property law. We'd worked together when I bought the land initially, and she'd helped me navigate the zoning requirements for the tower. "They don't have a case," Catherine said after reviewing the lawsuit. "The tower is on your property, it's legally permitted, and they have no standing to claim nuisance when they're not directly adjacent landowners, and they've benefited from the service it provides for years." "So what do?" I asked. "We file a motion to dismiss, which we'll probably win." "But that takes time and costs money. They're banking on you getting tired of fighting and giving them what they want. How much are you willing to spend on this?" I thought about the new lease agreement. "AT&T is covering my legal expenses related to defending the tower, so whatever it takes." Catherine laughed. "Well then, let's give them a fight." The legal process moved slowly, which I'd expected. We filed our motion to dismiss in early July, and the hearing wasn't scheduled until late August. In the meantime, I started noticing disturbing patterns on my security cameras. Cars would slow down as they passed my property, the occupants taking photos or videos. People would walk up to the fence line and stand there, staring at the tower. One afternoon, a woman I recognized from the HOA meeting actually opened my gate and walked onto the property before my security system alerted me, and I called out through the camera's speaker that she was trespassing. She hurried away, but I had her face clearly on video. The most concerning incident happened on a Saturday morning in mid-July. I was at my house in Temp when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the property cameras. When I pulled up the feed, I saw 3 people in Pine Ridge Estates polo shirts carrying equipment onto my land. They appeared to be taking soil samples. I called the sheriff's office immediately, and then I called Catherine. "That's trespassing and potentially destruction of property," she said. "If they're digging without permission, you can press charges." The sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, but by then the trespassers were gone. I showed him the video footage, and he recognized one of them as a member of the HOA board. "That's Dennis Kruger," the deputy said. "He's on the board. What the hell are they doing?" "Probably trying to find environmental violations they can report," I said. "Anything to build a case against the tower." The deputy took a copy of the footage and promised to follow up. That afternoon, I drove out to the property myself to inspect the damage. They dug several small holes near the tower's foundation and left the dirt scattered around. It was minimal damage, but it was deliberate and malicious. I was standing there taking photos when a white Mercedes SUV pulled up to the fence. Brenda Patterson got out, wearing designer sunglasses and a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "Mr. Garrison," she called out. "We need to talk." "Through our lawyers," I said, not looking up from my phone. "This has gone too far. You're being unreasonable, and it's hurting the entire community." I finally looked at her. "Your board members just trespassed on my property. There's nothing to talk about." "We were conducting a legitimate environmental assessment," Brenda said. "We have concerns about soil contamination from the tower." "You have concerns about not getting your way," I said. "That tower has been inspected by the EPA, the FCC, and every other relevant agency. It's clean. This is harassment." Brenda stepped closer to the fence, her face hard. "You don't understand what you're doing. Those 30 empty lots in Pine Ridge, we have a developer ready to buy them, but only if we can guarantee certain aesthetic standards. That tower is costing this community millions of dollars in potential development." "Not my problem," I said. You don't get to dictate what happens on my property just because it's convenient for your property values. What if we made you a real offer? Brenda said. $100,000, one-time payment. You remove the tower and we all move on. I stared at her. You want to pay me $100,000 to kill a lease that pays me $75,000 a year? Her eyes widened slightly. The lease renewed, I smiled. Last week, 10-year contract with annual increases. AT&T is very happy with the arrangement. Brenda's face went through several different emotions before settling on cold fury. You're making a mistake, Mr. Garrison. This community has resources and determination. We will make your life miserable. Is that a threat, Miss Patterson? It's a promise, she said, getting back into her Mercedes and driving away. I reported the conversation to Catherine, who documented it and added it to our case file. She's digging herself deeper, Catherine said. Keep records of everything. Every interaction, every incident. It's all evidence of harassment. The hearing on our motion to dismiss was scheduled for August 27th. In the 3 weeks leading up to it, the harassment escalated. Someone spray-painted graffiti on my fence. My mailbox at the property was vandalized. I received anonymous letters at my temp address warning me to do the right thing and think about the community. The security cameras caught some of it, but not all. Whoever was doing this was getting smarter about avoiding detection. I filed multiple police reports, but without clear evidence tying the vandalism to specific individuals, there wasn't much the sheriff's office could do. The stress was taking a toll. I wasn't sleeping well, constantly checking my phone for camera alerts. My girlfriend, Sarah, was worried about me. Maybe you should just sell the property, she said one evening as we ate dinner at my house. The money's not worth this. It's not about the money anymore, I said. It's about not letting some power-hungry HOA president bully me into submission. If I give in now, what message does that send? That you value your peace of mind over being right, Sarah suggested gently. She had a point, but I was too deep into the fight to back down now. The hearing was in 3 days and Catherine was confident we'd win. The night before the hearing, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was an automated call from my security system. Fire detected. I pulled up the camera feed and my heart stopped. Flames were spreading up the side of my equipment shed, about 50 feet from the cell tower. I called 911 and then jumped in my car, speeding toward the property. The drive from Temp normally took 25 minutes, but I made it in 18, running red lights and pushing my truck to 80 on the highway. By the time I arrived, the fire department was already there, and the shed was fully engulfed. The firefighters got it under control before it could spread to the tower, but the shed was a total loss. While they were packing up their equipment, a fire investigator approached me. Mr. Garrison, I'm Lieutenant Morrison with the Arson Investigation Unit. We found evidence of an accelerant. This fire was deliberately set. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed made my blood run cold. I have security footage, I said. The cameras cover the whole property. We watched the footage together on my phone. At 1:30 in the morning, a dark pickup truck had pulled up to the fence on the side farthest from the road. 2 figures in dark clothing climbed over, carrying what looked like gas cans. They doused the shed and lit it, then ran back to the truck and drove away. The license plate wasn't clearly visible, but the truck was distinctive. A black Ford F-150 with a distinctive dent in the rear bumper. We'll need a copy of this footage, Lieutenant Morrison said. This is serious. Arson carries significant prison time. The next morning, exhausted and angry, I met Catherine at the courthouse for our hearing. She took one look at me and frowned. What happened? I told her about the fire. Her expression went from concern to furious. This is beyond civil harassment now. This is criminal. We need to make sure the judge knows about this." The hearing was held in a small courtroom before Judge Maria Rodriguez. The HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Richard Hartley, presented their case for why the lawsuit should proceed. He argued that the HOA had standing because the tower affected property values and quality of life for all residents, and that nuisance law didn't require direct adjacency. Catherine demolished his arguments methodically. She pointed out that the HOA had no evidence of actual harm, that property values in Pine Ridge Estates had actually increased since the tower was built, and that the residents had benefited from the cell service for years. She also brought up the pattern of harassment and intimidation, culminating in the arson attack the previous night. Judge Rodriguez listened to both sides with an impassive expression. When the arguments concluded, she took off her glasses and addressed both lawyers. "Counselor Hartley, your client's position is deeply troubling to me. Not only does the HOA lack standing to bring this lawsuit, but there appears to be a pattern of escalating illegal behavior directed at Mr. Garrison. I'm granting the motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning this claim cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendant, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of the harassment and vandalism allegations." She looked directly at Brenda Patterson, who was sitting in the gallery. "Madam, if you're the HOA president, I strongly suggest you advise your members that any further illegal actions will result in criminal prosecution. This vendetta ends now. Do you understand?" Brenda stood up, her face pale. "Yes, Your Honor. Good. We're adjourned." I felt relief wash over me as we left the courtroom, but it was short-lived. Catherine pulled me aside in the hallway. The judge's warning was good, but people this obsessed don't always respond to reason. Stay vigilant. She was right to be cautious. That evening, I got a call from Lieutenant Morrison. "Mr. Garrison, we've identified the truck from your security footage. It belongs to Dennis Kruger, the HOA board member. We're obtaining a warrant for his arrest on arson charges. I wanted to give you a heads up because this is going to become very public very quickly." My mind raced. Does Brenda Patterson know about this? We'll be questioning her as well. If she was involved in planning or encouraging the arson, she could face conspiracy charges. The arrests happened the next day. Dennis Kruger was taken into custody at his home in Pine Ridge Estates. According to news reports, which started appearing by that afternoon, he initially denied everything but eventually admitted to setting the fire. He claimed he was acting alone, trying to protect the community from what he saw as a threat to their property values. But the investigation didn't stop there. Police obtained a warrant for HOA records and communications, and what they found was damning. There were dozens of emails and text messages between Brenda Patterson and Dennis Kruger discussing ways to pressure me into removing the tower. While most of the messages were vague enough to maintain deniability, there was one text from Brenda sent the day before the arson that read, "We need to do something dramatic. He's not getting the message." The district attorney decided that was enough to charge Brenda Patterson with conspiracy to commit arson and criminal intimidation. She was arrested 3 days after Kruger, and the story exploded in the local media. HOA president charged with arson conspiracy was the headline in the Arizona Republic. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The remaining Pine Ridge Estates board members resigned en masse. Homeowners in the development organized an emergency meeting to discuss dissolving the HOA entirely, or at least completely restructuring it. Property values in the community actually did drop, not because of the cell tower, but because nobody wanted to buy into a neighborhood associated with criminal activity and out-of-control HOA leadership. Todd Patterson called me a week after Brenda's arrest. He sounded exhausted. "Mr. Garrison, I want to apologize. I knew Brenda was obsessed with this, but I never imagined she'd go this far. I should have done more to stop her." "You tried to warn me," I said. "That's more than most people would have done." "I'm filing for divorce," Todd said quietly. This whole situation made me realize that I don't know my wife at all. The person who could encourage someone to commit arson over a property dispute isn't someone I can be married to. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Todd seemed like a decent guy caught in an impossible situation. "Don't be. This is on her, not you. I just wanted to let you know that not everyone in Pine Ridge supported what she was doing. A lot of us thought it was crazy from the start." The legal process played out over the following months. Dennis Kruger, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to arson and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Brenda Patterson tried to fight the charges, but the text messages and email evidence were too damning. Her lawyer eventually negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to conspiracy to commit arson and criminal intimidation, receiving a sentence of 18 months in county jail followed by 3 years of probation. The civil lawsuit the HOA had filed was officially withdrawn, and the new interim board sent me a formal letter of apology and an offer to pay for all damages to my property, including the burned shed. They also stopped all opposition to the cell tower and publicly acknowledged that it was a valuable asset to the community. I accepted their offer and used the money to rebuild the shed and install even better security systems. AT&T, grateful for my resilience in defending the tower site, offered me another lease increase and agreed to fund a professional landscaping project that actually made the property look quite nice. Desert plants, natural rock formations, and strategic placement of native trees softened the tower's visual impact without compromising its function. Sarah and I drove out to see the finished landscaping on a Saturday afternoon in early December. The Arizona winter was mild, the desert in bloom with subtle colors. The property looked better than I'd ever imagined it could. "You were right not to give in," Sarah said, holding my hand as we stood near the tower. "This is yours. Nobody had the right to tell you what to do with it." "It was a hell of a fight, though," I said. "I'm just glad it's over." "Is it, though?" Sarah asked. "Won't Brenda Patterson be out of jail eventually? In about a year, probably, with good behavior," I said, "but she'll be on probation. If she comes near me or this property, she goes back to jail. Besides, I think even she has learned her lesson by now." I was wrong about that last part, but I didn't find out until much later. For the moment, standing there in the December sunshine with the woman I loved, looking at property that was finally, peacefully mine, I allowed myself to believe the worst was behind me. The holidays came and went without incident. I spent Christmas with Sarah and her family in Flagstaff, and New Year's Eve at a friend's party in Phoenix. The property sat quiet and secure, generating a steady income and requiring minimal maintenance. For the first time in months, I wasn't constantly checking security camera feeds or jumping at every phone notification. January brought a new development. A reporter from a national news magazine contacted me about doing a story on HOA overreach and abuse. Apparently, my case had attracted attention in property rights circles, and there was interest in using it to highlight larger problems with how homeowner associations operated in America. I agreed to the interview, which was published in March. The article, titled "The Cell Tower War: How One Man Stood Up to HOA Tyranny," presented a detailed account of everything that had happened. It included interviews with legal experts discussing HOA reform, former Pine Ridge residents talking about Brenda's increasingly authoritarian behavior over the years, and even a brief statement from Todd Patterson about the personal cost of HOA obsession. The article went viral online. I started getting emails from people all over the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were trivial disputes over mailbox colors or holiday decorations, but others involved serious harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power. The common thread was HOA boards drunk on their tiny bit of authority, wielding rules and regulations like weapons against anyone who dared to push back. A state legislator from Scottsdale reached out to me in April. Her name was Representative Jessica Chen, and she was drafting legislation to reform HOA governance in Arizona. Your case is the perfect example of what happens when HOAs have too much power and too little oversight, she told me during a meeting at her office. I want to introduce a bill that would create an appeals process for HOA decisions, limit the ways HOAs can sue property owners, and increase penalties for HOA board members who engage in harassment or criminal behavior. What can I do to help? I asked. Testify when we hold hearings on the bill. Your story resonates with people because it's so clear-cut. You were in the right, they were in the wrong, and they still made your life hell. That's what we need to change. I agreed. And in June, I found myself sitting in a committee room at the Arizona State Capitol, telling my story to a panel of legislators. The room was packed with people on both sides of the issue. Homeowners who'd been victimized by HOAs, and HOA board members who argued that reform would make it impossible to maintain property values and community standards. The debate was heated, but the momentum seemed to be on the reform side. My case, combined with several others that had recently made headlines, created political pressure for change. The bill passed out of committee in July and was headed for a full-floor vote in the fall. Meanwhile, Brenda Patterson was released from jail in late June after serving 13 months of her 18-month sentence. I learned about her release from Lieutenant Morrison, who called to warn me. She's on probation, but that doesn't mean she's not a potential threat, he said. Stay aware of your surroundings and call us immediately if she makes any contact with you. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. I continued my normal routine, checking on the property once a week and otherwise living my life. Sarah had moved in with me in May and we were talking about getting engaged. Things were good. Then, on a Tuesday evening in mid-July, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was amends. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was from Brenda Patterson. It was long and rambling, alternating between apology and justification. She acknowledged that things had gotten out of hand and that she regretted the pain caused. But she also insisted that her intentions had been good, that she'd only wanted what was best for the community, and that I had been unnecessarily obstinate about compromising. The email ended with a proposal. She wanted to meet with me in person to clear the air and move forward positively. She suggested meeting at a coffee shop in Scottsdale the following Saturday. I forwarded the email to Catherine Ellis and Lieutenant Morrison immediately. Catherine's response was brief. Do not respond. Do not meet with her. This violates the spirit, if not the letter, of her probation terms. Lieutenant Morrison was more direct. He called me within an hour. This is witness intimidation and possibly harassment. I'm contacting her probation officer right now. She's not supposed to contact you at all. What happens to her? I asked. Depends on the probation officer and the judge, but she could be sent back to jail to finish her sentence. At minimum, she'll get a formal warning. I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. Part of me wanted Brenda to face consequences for still refusing to leave me alone, but another part of me just wanted the whole situation to be over forever. The probation violation hearing was held in August. I had to attend because the email to me was the primary evidence. Brenda appeared before the judge looking thinner and older than I remembered, her expensive clothes replaced by department store basics, her confident demeanor replaced by something more subdued. Her lawyer argued that the email was a good-faith attempt at reconciliation, not intimidation. The probation officer recommended a warning rather than jail time, noting that Brenda had otherwise complied with all terms of her release. Judge Rodriguez, the same judge who dismissed the original HOA lawsuit, was not sympathetic. "Miss Patterson, when I sentenced you, I made it very clear that you were to have no contact with Mr. Garrison. No contact means no contact. It doesn't mean you can send apologetic emails or request meetings. You violated the terms of your probation, and there must be consequences." She sentenced Brenda to 90 days in jail to be followed by the remainder of her original probation period. Brenda's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. As I left the courthouse, I felt a strange emptiness. I'd won, completely and definitively, but the victory felt hollow. This whole battle had consumed nearly 2 years of my life, cost Brenda Patterson her freedom and her marriage, and accomplished nothing positive for anyone. Sarah met me outside the courthouse. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Tired," I said. "Really tired. Want to go home?" "Yeah, let's go home." The HOA reform bill passed the Arizona legislature in September and was signed into law by the governor in October. It included most of what Representative Chen had proposed: an appeals process for HOA decisions, restrictions on HOA lawsuits, mandatory training for HOA board members, and enhanced penalties for harassment and abuse of power. Several other states were considering similar legislation, using Arizona as a model. I was invited to the bill signing ceremony, which felt surreal. The governor mentioned my case specifically in her remarks, calling it an example of why reform was necessary. Reporters took photos of me shaking hands with legislators. For a brief moment, I was a minor celebrity in the world of property rights advocacy. But mostly, I just wanted to move on with my life. The property continued to generate good income from the AT&T lease. I hired a property management company to handle maintenance and security monitoring, so I didn't have to think about it constantly. Sarah and I got engaged in November and started planning a small wedding for the following spring. Pine Ridge Estates, meanwhile, had dissolved its HOA entirely and reorganized as a voluntary neighborhood association with no enforcement powers. The 30 empty lots were eventually sold to individual buyers, and the community moved forward without the iron-fisted governance that had defined it under Brenda Patterson's leadership. I ran into Todd Patterson one last time, in early December, at a hardware store in Phoenix. We recognized each other at the same moment, both of us freezing in the aisle before he cautiously approached. "Zachary," he said, offering his hand. "How are you?" "Good," I said, shaking his hand. "You? Better. The divorce is final. I'm dating someone new, someone who thinks HOA boards are as ridiculous as I do." He smiled weakly. "I heard about the probation violation. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "Not your fault," I said. "I know, but still. Brenda was my wife. Her actions reflected on me whether I agreed with them or not." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think the whole situation taught me something important about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. You did that. I didn't." "You warned me when you didn't have to," I reminded him. "That took courage." "Not enough courage," he said, "but I'm working on it. Take care, Zachary. You too, Todd. I watched him walk away, another casualty of Brenda Patterson's obsessive need for control. The whole thing could have been avoided if she just accepted that not everything in the world was subject to her authority, that some things existed outside the neat little boxes of HOA rules and regulations. Brenda completed her 90-day sentence and was released in late November. I never heard from her again directly, but I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Nevada to live with a sister, effectively exiling herself from the Phoenix area and the ruins of her former life. Sarah and I got married in April at a small venue in Sedona, surrounded by red rocks and spring flowers. We'd invited about 50 people, mostly family and close friends. Catherine Ellis came, as did Representative Chen and even Lieutenant Morrison. It was a celebration not just of our relationship, but of surviving a bizarre ordeal and coming out the other side intact. During the reception, my best man gave a toast that referenced the cell tower saga, as it had become known in our friend group. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, but I was also aware of how easily things could have gone differently. If I'd given in to Brenda's initial demands, I would have set a precedent for bullying. If AT&T hadn't supported me with the enhanced lease and legal coverage, I might not have been able to afford the fight. If the evidence hadn't been so clear-cut, the criminal charges might never have stuck. I was lucky in a lot of ways. Lucky to own property that gave me leverage. Lucky to have good lawyers and supportive authorities. Lucky that the people trying to intimidate me were stupid enough to leave evidence and escalate to obvious crimes. A lot of people fighting HOA battles didn't have those advantages. They just had to endure harassment, pay fines, and hope that eventually the board would move on to tormenting someone else. The new legislation would help, but it wouldn't solve everything. As long as HOAs existed, there would be people who saw board membership as an opportunity for petty tyranny. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem was dancing with my new wife under string lights as the sun set over the Arizona desert, feeling grateful for the life I'd built and the battles I'd survived. The cell tower on my property continued to transmit signals, connecting thousands of people to the wider world. The lease payments funded our honeymoon to New Zealand and a down payment on a bigger house. The property itself, once a source of endless stress, became just another asset, another piece of the financial foundation Sarah and I were building together. Sometimes I drive past Pine Ridge Estates on my way to check on the property. The neighborhood looks quiet and normal, indistinguishable from dozens of other planned communities in the Phoenix metro area. The houses are well maintained, the landscaping is neat, and there's no visible sign of the chaos that consumed it for nearly 2 years. But I know the stories those houses hold. I know about the residents who were terrorized by constant HOA violation notices, who paid thousands in fines for trivial infractions, who lived in fear of Brenda Patterson's next crusade. Some of them stayed after the HOA dissolved, grateful for the freedom. Others sold and moved away, wanting nothing to do with the memories. The cell tower stands tall and unbothered, a silent monument to the principle that property rights matter, that bullies don't always win, and that sometimes fighting back is worth the cost. Every month when the lease payment hits my account, I think about that principle and feel satisfied. Brenda Patterson served her time and disappeared from public life. Dennis Kruger got out of prison after 3 years and moved to another state. The Pine Ridge Estates community moved on, eventually regaining the property values that Brenda had been so obsessed with protecting. The irony wasn't lost on me. The thing that finally stabilized the neighborhood was getting rid of the HOA president, who'd claim to be its greatest defender. Years from now, when Sarah and I tell stories about our early relationship, the cell tower saga will be prominent. It's already become a sort of legend among our friends, the time I accidentally went to war with a homeowner association, and won. The details will probably get exaggerated over time, the way stories do, until I'm some kind of folk hero standing alone against institutional oppression. The reality was messier and more complicated than that. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted to be left alone to do what I wanted with my own property. The fact that this simple desire turned into a 2-year legal battle, criminal prosecutions, and eventually state legislation says more about the broken state of HOA governance than it does about me. But I'll take the win. I'll take the reformed laws, the lease payments, the satisfaction of knowing that I didn't bend to threats and intimidation. I'll take the marriage that survived the stress of constant harassment and came out stronger. And I'll take the lesson that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you don't choose, the ones that choose you. Standing up to Brenda Patterson wasn't optional, not if I wanted to maintain my self-respect and protect my rights. The cost was high, but the alternative would have been higher. The cell tower continues its work, invisible electromagnetic waves connecting people to each other across distances. In a way, that's fitting. This whole story was about connection and disconnection. A community that tried to disconnect me from my property rights, authorities who connected the dots to bring criminals to justice, a marriage that stayed connected through adversity. I control the cell tower lease that gives the HOA signal. But more importantly, I control my own destiny, my own property, and my own response to those who would try to take that control away. That's worth more than any amount of money, any legal victory, any legislation. That's freedom.